At the moment he raised his glass in our marble dining room, celebrating the mansion the court had given him, I smiled for the cameras, because he didn't know what I'd already taken. This isn't just a story about losing everything you can touch. It's about reclaiming everything you can build. If you believe justice can be quiet, elegant, and unstoppable, make sure you subscribe. You'll want to see how an empire is taken back, one signature at a time. He raised his glass beneath the chandelier we'd chosen together, its crystals scattering light across the same walls where I once thought we'd grow old. The champagne shimmered, the cameras flashed, and my ex-husband, Michael Lawson, co-founder of the empire we'd built from nothing, smiled like the king of something he hadn't earned. "To new beginnings," he said, pausing just long enough to make sure every guest, every photographer, every gossip columnist caught the gleam of his wedding band to wife number 2. "And to the home that reminds me how far hard work can take you." Hard work. That word tasted metallic in my mouth, like blood. I stood beside the grand piano, his grand piano now, smiling as if the sound of that word didn't scrape bone. Because no one knew that while Michael had taken the mansion, I had quietly taken the company that paid for it. Not in name, not yet, but in every way that mattered. In the night of that toast, my face was everywhere. "Grace Lawson, gracious even in defeat," the headline said, as though I'd lost something that wasn't replaceable. But the truth is, that mansion had never been a home. It was a showroom for his ego, every imported tile proof of how deeply he needed the world to see him win. Let them see it. Let them all believe he'd won. Because my victory wasn't meant for cameras. It was meant for balance sheets, for quiet signatures, for the kind of empire that doesn't glitter. It hums, steady and unstoppable, under the surface. And the toast replayed across social media for days. The comments flooded in. "She's so composed. I could never smile like that after losing everything. Grace is pure class." They were right about one thing. Composure is a weapon. I learned that the morning the court ruled against me. The gavel hit like thunder, and Michael's lawyer, slick, expensive, predatory, had turned to shake my hand with a grin that said, "We buried you with your own evidence." That was the day I stopped fighting for fairness and started building for survival. Balan, to 3 years earlier, when the empire was still ours, I'd been the architect of its foundation. Michael was the face, the visionary in tailored suits giving speeches about innovation. I was the quiet strategist, the one who turned his charisma into contracts and his ambition into margins. Together, we were unstoppable, until I noticed the numbers that didn't add up, until business travel started meaning weekends in Napa, until the board meetings turned into ambushes. By the time I hired my own attorney, Michael had already filed. The divorce wasn't personal, it was tactical. He thought if he struck first, he could rewrite history. He was half right. In the night after the verdict, I sat in the empty guest room of a friend's apartment. Half my wardrobe in boxes, half my dignity in storage. My phone lit up with a single message from Michael. "I hope you can let go. This is what's best for both of us." I stared at it until my reflection blurred on the screen. Then I opened my laptop, because if he wanted peace, I wanted leverage. That leverage began with a single folder, Lion Corp Holdings Internal, Confidential. Our empire had always been divided into shells and subsidiaries, for tax efficiency, as Michael liked to say. But I'd built the bones of that structure myself. I knew where the shells connected, where the assets hid, where the ownership trail blurred into legal fog. And I knew the one detail Michael had overlooked. My name was still on the intellectual property registration for the company's original algorithm, the product that had made Lion Corp unstoppable. One signature, hidden deep in a government database, tying me forever to the empire's core asset. He could take the mansion, he could take the cars, but the code, the beating heart of Lion Corp, belonged to me. When I saw Michael's toast go viral a month later, it didn't sting. It clarified. The world could believe he'd won the surface game. That's fine, because my game was slower, quieter, built in the dark. While he paraded in linen suits through magazine spreads, I was meeting with lawyers in glass offices downtown, the kind of lawyers who spoke in chess terms, not emotions. "Ownership trails are like veins," one of them said, tracing a diagram with a gold pen. "If you know where the blood really flows, you can stop the heart without anyone noticing." That was when the plan took shape. Not revenge, reclamation. Beisai. A week after his wedding, I walked into LionCorp's Seattle headquarters for the first time since the divorce. The security guard, a kid who looked barely old enough to vote, froze when I scanned my old ID badge. The system still recognized me. "Welcome back, Ms. Lawson," the monitor said. And I smiled, because that's the thing about empires. They never expect the builder to return. Not as Jordan. If you've ever been underestimated, if someone ever took what was yours and called it justice, stay with me. Because this isn't a story about losing a mansion. It's a story about how I took back the empire that paid for it. The first time I walked into LionCorp after the divorce, the smell hit me before the memories did. Coffee, ozone, ambition. The same sterile, expensive scent they piped through the lobby to convince investors they were breathing success. I'd chosen it myself years ago. Something that smells like innovation, I'd told the interior designer. She'd smiled and handed me a sleek glass bottle labeled Future Number 9. Now, the scent made me nauseous. The receptionist was new. Fresh manicure, nervous smile. Probably had no idea her signature on a non-disclosure agreement was worth more than her yearly salary. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, returning her smile with the kind of calm that unnerves people. "Tell Mr. Lawson's office that Grace is here for her final sign-off on the LionCorp IP transition documents." It wasn't a lie, exactly. It just wasn't scheduled. She hesitated. "Do you have an appointment?" "Not today," I said, "but he'll want to see me." And he would, if only to make sure the ghost of his ex-wife wasn't haunting the building. I rode the elevator to the 27th floor, the same one I'd once decorated with photos of our first prototypes and our first office space, a single room above a print shop where the ceiling leaked every winter. Back then, Michael and I had shared one desk, one dream, one delusion, that we were unstoppable together. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The new receptionist, Michael's assistant now, not ours, stood when she saw me. Her nameplate read, Chloe Brennan. Chloe's eyes widened. "Mrs. Lawson, sorry, Ms. Lawson, I wasn't expecting." "I'm not here for him," I interrupted softly. "Just the records." My voice was polite, but my presence wasn't. I walked past her before she could object, following muscle memory down the glass hallway toward the office that used to be mine. It still had the same view, Elliott Bay glittering like a promise no one could keep. But the wall art had changed. Where my minimalist prints had hung, there were now framed magazine covers featuring Michael, the empire builder, the visionary, the comeback king. I almost laughed. Empires always rewrite their history. And behind his glass desk sat a woman in a cream blazer and perfectly neutral lipstick. "Who are you?" she asked without looking up. "The reason your job exists," I said. She blinked, uncertain if it was an insult. "Relax, I'm just here for paperwork." I crossed the office to the filing cabinet in the corner. Still the same lock, still the same code, 0729, our anniversary. Of course he'd never changed it. Men like Michael never think their downfall comes from sentimentality. Inside were contracts, intellectual property assignments, NDAs, partnership amendments, legal arteries of an empire. I flipped through until I found the folder I wanted. LionCorp, Algorithm V1 Ownership Transfer. The date on the top page, August 12th, 2014, the day before our wedding. He'd made me sign the assignment then, sliding the paper between florists and caterer invoices. "It's just a formality," he'd said, kissing my shoulder as I signed. I didn't know then that I was transferring half of our future to a man who saw marriage as a merger and divorce as liquidation. But here's what he hadn't noticed. A second document, dated 2 months later, filed electronically under Founders IP maintenance. My signature again, but this time, beside a clause he never read. Intellectual property rights remain shared until both parties consent in writing to dissolve joint ownership. He never filed the dissolution. He'd been too busy moving into the mansion. So technically, legally, irrevocably, I still owned the code. And I left the building before he returned, but not before scanning the documents. The security guard didn't even glance at me as I passed. Ghosts, after all, don't raise suspicion. That night, I spread the papers across my kitchen table in my small rented condo. Each page was a brick in the new foundation I was building. The original algorithm had evolved, of course, but its DNA, its core logic, was mine. Every derivative, every module, every update was traceable back to that code, and the company had never refiled the patent under a new owner. In legal terms, LionCorp wasn't Michael's empire. It was mine. And for weeks, I played the part of silence, Online, I posted photos of travel, of healing, a yoga retreat in Sedona, a wine tasting in Sonoma, a soft launch Instagram of a new consulting firm, Graceworks Strategic Partners. The algorithm was still hidden, encrypted behind servers Michael believed he controlled. But control is a funny thing. It's never about possession. It's about knowledge. And I knew every password pattern he'd ever used. 3 nights in, I was back in LionCorp's mainframe under a dummy account, pulling access logs, cross-referencing development branches, tracing API keys. My fingers moved automatically, like a pianist returning to a forgotten piece. At 3:04 a.m., the system confirmed what I needed. The core logic file was still attributed to my account. Creator, G. Lawson, co-owner. I took a screenshot, then another, then an entire video recording of the system logs. Evidence, proof, power. And the next step wasn't sabotage, it was strategy. I called Victoria Chan, my attorney from the divorce, the one who'd watched the trial's verdict with a kind of grim prophecy in her eyes. "Grace," she said when she picked up, "tell me this is about peace, and not another war. It's about correction," I said. "He's built a castle on my blueprints." She sighed, the kind of sigh lawyers give when they already know they'll take the case. "Send me everything," she said. "And Grace, make sure you're ready for what happens when the light hits this. Men like Michael don't crumble, they retaliate." "Let him try," I said. "I built the floor he's standing on." Now that weekend, while Michael and his new wife hosted a charity gala at the mansion, Victoria and I filed the preliminary motion for intellectual property review, quietly. No press, no noise, just paperwork, as unassuming as a whisper, but whispers travel. By Monday morning, word had reached LionCorp's general counsel. I knew because my phone lit up with a text from an old colleague. "Grace, what did you do?" "He's in a panic." I smiled, sipping coffee from the chipped mug I'd kept through everything. It wasn't satisfaction yet. It was something steadier, justice warming up its engines. Now that afternoon, Michael called. His name glowed on my phone like a scar reopening. "I see you're trying to make this difficult," he said without preamble. His voice was the same measured arrogance that once charmed investors. "I'm not trying," I replied. "It just comes naturally. You don't know what you're messing with, Grace. LionCorp is bigger than both of us. I know exactly what I built," I said. "And I know exactly what still belongs to me." He exhaled sharply. "You're not going to win this." "I don't have to," I said, smiling. "I just have to make the truth public." And then I hung up. That night, the city was drenched in rain. Lightning turned the skyline into a pulse of silver. I stood by the window, watching the mansion lights blink faintly across the bay, and thought of the years I'd spent building that empire brick by brick, line by line of code. He thought he'd taken everything that mattered, but all he'd really taken was the illusion of control. Because beneath the marble floors of his mansion, beneath the glass offices and the magazine covers, the blueprint was still mine. And I was about to remind him, quietly, legally, elegantly, that empires built on borrowed foundations always fall the same way, from the inside out. War doesn't always start with an explosion. Sometimes it begins with silence, the kind that hums through a boardroom just before the first email lands in everyone's inbox. At 8:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, that silence broke. Subject line: Intellectual Property Review, Urgent. Every senior executive at LionCorp received it simultaneously. Attached was a polite, lethal notice, a petition for shared ownership verification regarding the core algorithm, the foundation of every LionCorp product. And my name was right there on the line marked co-inventor. By 8:13, my phone buzzed nonstop. Former colleagues, investors, analysts, all suddenly remembering that I existed. The whispers started to move faster than the truth itself. Didn't she lose everything? Wasn't she gone? No, I thought. Just quiet. And quiet isn't the same as gone. While Michael scrambled to contain the damage, I made tea in my small kitchen and opened my laptop. I had prepared for this exact day for months. Every document, every timestamp, every screenshot of server logs had already been uploaded to a secure cloud folder shared only with Victoria, my attorney. The file was called The Blueprint Project, because that's what this was. Not destruction, but reconstruction. Victoria called at 8:30 sharp. "It started," she said. "General Counsel's office just contacted us. They're requesting a mediation meeting before things go public." I smiled into my mug. He's already bleeding if they're begging for silence. She hesitated. Grace, they'll offer a settlement. He'll try to buy you out. I don't want his money, I said. I want the truth in writing. I want acknowledgement. Truth is expensive, she warned. So was my peace, I said, and I already paid for that. And across the bay, in the mansion he'd fought so hard to keep, Michael was unraveling. Not publicly, not yet, but privately in the ways that matter. His new wife, Emily, would later tell a friend, and the tabloids would repeat it, that he'd stopped sleeping, that he'd started pacing the halls at night, muttering about contracts and control, that his temper had become unpredictable. Of course it had, because control is oxygen to men like him, and I'd just cut off the air supply. 2 days later, I walked into Victoria's office for mediation prep. The view overlooked downtown Seattle, all gray steel and rain-streaked glass. Victoria sat behind her desk, her notes arranged like chess pieces. Here's what they'll try first, she said, tapping her pen. Minimization. They'll frame you as the ex-wife seeking attention, not a co-founder protecting her work. Then, they'll dangle a large sum in exchange for full IP relinquishment. How large? I asked. 7 figures minimum, she said. Enough to make most people forget their principles. I smiled. Then let's make them raise the offer high enough to reveal their fear. Victoria chuckled softly. You're enjoying this more than you admit. I'm enjoying the clarity, I said. For once, I get to speak with evidence instead of emotion. The mediation took place in a neutral downtown building with the kind of bland luxury that made even conflict feel expensive. Polished marble floors, filtered water dispensers, the faint hum of power disguised as professionalism. Michael arrived 10 minutes late, as always, his suit immaculate, his expression somewhere between smug and anxious. He greeted everyone but me. When his eyes finally met mine, it wasn't recognition. It was calculation. Grace, he said evenly, I didn't expect you'd still be fighting. I stopped fighting the day you underestimated me, I replied. The mediator, a former judge, cleared his throat, glancing between us. Let's proceed. For 2 hours their lawyers talked in circles. Corporate jargon, legal euphemisms, phrases like reasonable settlement, mutual benefit, closure. I listened, silent, while Victoria's calm precision dismantled each claim. When they finished, she slid a folder across the table. Inside, the original IP filings, the unaltered metadata, and a notarized affidavit verifying that every update to LionCorp's algorithm originated from the original codebase. Mine. The mediator's expression changed. Just slightly, but enough. Michael's didn't. He still thought charm could rewrite the truth. Grace, he said smoothly, leaning forward. What do you actually want? You don't even work here anymore. What's the endgame? I met his gaze. To make sure the empire you built on my foundation starts acknowledging where its ground really lies. He smirked. You could have asked nicely. I did, I said. When I signed that first contract. You should have read it. By the end of the meeting, his lawyers requested a pause to reassess. That was corporate code for panic. On my way out, I passed a group of junior associates in the hallway, all of them pretending not to stare, all of them knowing exactly who I was. The ghost had become real again, and the empire was trembling. The following week, something interesting happened. An anonymous leak surfaced in the Seattle Ledger, detailing internal emails between Michael and his finance team, messages hinting at falsified project budgets, undisclosed bonuses, and questionable expense reports tied to the mansion's renovations. The article didn't name the source. It didn't have to. Victoria called that morning, half whispering and half laughing. Grace, tell me you didn't. I didn't, I said truthfully. But apparently someone inside decided it was time for accountability. Your quiet war has allies now, she said. Inside LionCorp, the tension thickened. Board members began calling emergency meetings. Investors demanded statements. The mansion that once symbolized Michael's power had become a metaphor for excess and corruption. And me? I kept my silence. I didn't post a thing. I didn't gloat. I let the storm build naturally. Because I'd learned something crucial. Silence, when backed by truth, sounds like thunder. Then 2 weeks later, a message arrived in my inbox. Subject line, board inquiry, confidential. The email was from LionCorp's CFO, a woman named Mara DeWitt, one of the few people I'd always respected. Grace, I know you have every reason not to trust anyone connected to Michael, but the board is considering an independent review of ownership structure. Off the record, several of us believe your claims are legitimate. If you're open to a private discussion, I'd like to meet. MD, I read it twice before replying. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., the cafe across from Pier 59. When we met, Mara looked exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes from realizing the empire you serve might have been built on a lie. She stirred her coffee and said quietly, "He used your name to secure early patents. The internal archive still lists you as co-author on multiple modules. If you pursue this publicly, he's finished." "I'm not after destruction," I said. "Just acknowledgement." She smiled faintly. "That's what makes you dangerous." Tas Arinin. By the end of March, the headlines had changed tone. Lion Corp faces internal audit after co-founder's legal filing. The empire's hidden architect, Grace Lawson, the woman behind the code. Public sentiment shifted like tidewater. Investors started to whisper about leadership changes. The board called for a vote of review. And on a gray Thursday morning, Michael's assistant sent one final message to my inbox from chloe.brennan@lioncorp.com. Subject: He's asking for you. He says he'll only meet if it's you. Please. It's urgent. I closed my laptop slowly, my reflection faint against the dark screen. The quiet war had ended. Now came the reckoning. Empires don't fall overnight. They splinter, quietly at first, hairline fractures beneath the marble. Then the cracks spread until even the chandeliers start to tremble. By the time Michael asked to meet, the fractures were already deep enough to swallow him whole. The meeting was set for a Saturday morning. A neutral setting, his assistant had said. He just wants to talk. They'd chosen the Baylight Hotel, one of those waterfront monuments to discreet luxury, where powerful people pretended to reconcile while their lawyers prepared new wars. The rain was thin that morning, a mist that blurred the skyline and made the city look like it was holding its breath. I arrived 5 minutes early. Old habit. Preparation always came before confrontation. He was waiting in the private lounge. The same man, but smaller somehow, less tailored, less certain. His tie was loose. The veins in his hands showed when he gripped his coffee cup. "Grace," he said, standing halfway, as if unsure whether I'd let him greet me. I didn't. I sat down opposite him. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "I wasn't sure you'd ask." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick with all the things we'd already destroyed. Trust, loyalty, maybe even love. Finally, he exhaled. "The board is turning on me," he said. "Mara's feeding them your narrative. Maybe they just like the truth better than your version," I replied. He ignored that. "You've made your point. You've embarrassed me publicly, humiliated my wife, spooked my investors. What do you want?" There it was. The question I'd been waiting months for. I leaned forward. "I want my name restored to every patent, every public record, every press release that ever erased it. I want formal acknowledgement that Lion Corp's foundation was built on shared intellectual property. And I want a statement signed by the board, not you." He blinked. "You don't want money?" "I already had money," I said. "You took it, and I made more." His jaw tightened. "You think you've won?" "No," I said softly. "Winning would mean you still matter." He looked away then, staring through the glass wall at the rain streaking down. "You've turned into someone cold," he said. "No," I replied. "I just stopped warming people who freeze me out. For a heartbeat." I saw something flicker across his face. Regret, maybe, but it was fleeting. The way guilt always is with men who confuse possession for love. He tried one last card. "Grace, if you push this, Lion Corp could collapse. Hundreds of employees could lose their jobs. Then maybe the next company they build will be honest," I said. The conversation ended there, not with shouting, but with something far sharper, understanding. He realized there was no version of this story where he came out untarnished. And for the first time since the divorce, he didn't try to charm me. He just looked tired. The next morning, the Seattle Ledger ran a story that made my phone vibrate nonstop for hours. Lion Corp co-founder steps back amid ownership investigation. The subheading read, "Sources confirm internal audit corroborates Grace Lawson's original intellectual property claim." The article was merciless. They quoted former employees. They referenced financial mismanagement, inflated valuations, and an internal culture of concealment. It wasn't just scandal, it was autopsy. And I didn't leak it. I didn't have to. Truth, once awakened, tends to tell itself. Well, by midweek, The mansion, his monument to success, was photographed from every angle by drones and tabloids alike. The house that Grace built, one headline called it. He took the mansion. She took the empire. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victoria called that evening, her tone brisk but triumphant. "They're offering full reinstatement," she said. "Every filing, every document, and a public statement. Draft's on its way." I stared out the window of my condo, watching fairy lights blur across Elliott Bay. "What's the catch?" "There isn't one," she said. "He's done. The board's voted to replace him as CEO." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow, because sometimes victory doesn't roar. It exhales. As 2 days later, I received the official board statement. Effective immediately, Lion Corp Holdings acknowledges the contributions and intellectual property co-ownership of Ms. Grace Lawson. Her foundational work on the company's core technologies remains integral to our identity and ongoing innovation. I read it once, then again. Then I folded the paper and slid it into a drawer, not as a trophy, as a reminder. But empires don't crumble quietly, and Michael didn't vanish overnight. The week after the announcement, he held a press conference outside the mansion gates. Cameras flashed as he gave a carefully rehearsed statement about partnership, shared vision, and regret for misunderstandings. I watched it from my living room, tea cooling beside me. The same voice that once whispered promises now spun damage control. His eyes were red-rimmed. His wedding ring was gone. He said my name twice, once as gratitude, once as warning. When the cameras turned off, he didn't know the mic was still live. He muttered, "She took everything." He wasn't wrong, but he'd missed the meaning. I hadn't taken everything. I'd taken back what was mine. And that night, Mara called. "He's resigning," she said. "He'll sell his shares before the end of the quarter. The board wants you on as an advisor for the transition." I almost laughed. "Advisor? For the company that once erased me? They need you," she said simply. "Lion Corp won't survive without your name attached." I didn't answer right away. I looked around my apartment, the rented space that had witnessed my rebuilding, and thought about power, about how it changes shape once you stop chasing it. "Tell them," I said finally. "I'll consider it, but only if the first meeting's held somewhere other than that mansion of lies." Mara laughed. "You really are terrifying. Only to men who thought I couldn't rebuild," I said. The next morning, my reflection in the mirror looked different. Not softer, not harder, just honest. There were lines now where laughter used to live, but they weren't sadness. They were proof of endurance. I walked to the window and watched the dawn light hit the water. Seattle glittered like a city mid-redemption. The empire had cracked, but something new was forming in its ruins. Something that didn't need marble or chandeliers or a man's permission to exist. At 9:47 a.m., an email arrived from a reporter I'd met months earlier. "Grace, now that the board's confirmed your ownership, our readers are asking one question. What's next for you? Are you going back to Lion Corp?" I typed slowly. "No, I'm building something new, something cleaner. The next empire won't need a mansion to prove it exists." Then I hit send and closed the laptop. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to him. I was creating again. Empires don't fall overnight, but sometimes, when they finally do, what rises from the cracks isn't ruin, it's rebirth. And that's what Michael never understood. I didn't just take back the empire that paid for his mansion. I became the architect of my own peace. The email came at 6:02 a.m., a time that used to belong to alarm clocks and corporate urgency. These days, I woke on my own. The subject line was polite, deceptively simple. Subject: formal invitation. Strategic advisory role. I didn't open it right away. I made coffee first, listening to the slow hum of the city waking below my window. The air smelled like rain and second chances. When I finally clicked the message, the corporate formality barely masked the desperation underneath. "Dear Ms. Lawson, following the recent board transitions, Lion Corp Holdings formally invites you to join our Strategic Advisory Council. Your insight and leadership have been foundational to our continued success. The position offers full voting privileges, equity restoration, and creative control in future product development. We would be honored to welcome you home." Home. The word caught in my throat like a stone. Lion Corp had never been home. It was the place where I'd built a legacy that someone else tried to steal. The place where my ideas were dressed in Michael's voice and sold as vision. Now they wanted me back to bless the ruins with legitimacy. Tears by noon, Victoria had already heard. They'll dress it up as reconciliation, she said over the phone. But what they want is your silence and your name on their letterhead. That company's reputation is hanging by a thread. Then maybe I should let it break, I said. She paused. Grace, you could take the offer. Leverage it. Run the company on your terms. I looked out across Elliott Bay, where a ferry was slicing through fog. You don't rebuild peace on the same foundation that cracked, I said. Victoria sighed. You know, most people would kill for this kind of redemption arc. I'm not most people, I said softly. I'm the sequel. But still, I went to the meeting. Not to accept, but to see the Empire one last time, to take its measure. LionCorp's headquarters gleamed like a repentant sinner. New banners, new slogans, all promising transparency and innovation. They'd even redesigned the lobby, swapping out the glossy black walls for soft amber lighting, as if warmth could erase history. Mara met me at the door. She looked relieved, maybe even proud. You look incredible, she said, offering her hand. So do you, I said, meaning it. It's good to see a capable woman finally running this place. She smiled. Let's hope it lasts. We walked together through the corridors I once helped design. Clean glass, minimalist furniture, the hum of servers behind soundproof panels. It still smelled like future number 9, the synthetic scent I'd chosen years ago. Some ghosts don't leave, they just get repackaged. In the boardroom looked smaller than I remembered. Funny how power can distort scale. Michael's chair at the head of the table was gone. In its place sat Mara, flanked by half a dozen executives who now looked eager, fragile, and newly human. Grace, Mara began, thank you for coming. I won't waste your time. We want to make this official. A folder slid across the table. Inside, a contract for an annual retainer, equity reinstatement, and a seat on the Strategic Advisory Council. The number at the bottom was obscene, the kind of figure designed to erase conscience. I didn't touch it. This is generous, I said. Deserved, Mara corrected. You're the reason LionCorp exists. We should have said it sooner. One of the older men, a financial officer I vaguely remembered from early investor meetings, cleared his throat. Ms. Lawson, this company can't afford another scandal. We need your name, your credibility. Investors trust you. There it was. Not respect. Necessity. Nasan. And I leaned back, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them sweat. Tell me, I said finally, why should I help you fix a system that celebrated the man who erased me? Mara met my eyes steadily. Because the people who work here still believe in what you built, and because sometimes the best revenge is turning the place that broke you into something better. It was a good line. One I might have written myself once upon a time, but revenge wasn't my fuel anymore. Freedom was. I stood. I appreciate the offer, truly, but LionCorp doesn't need me to survive. It needs to remember why it existed in the first place, and that won't come from me returning. It'll come from you rebuilding. The older man frowned. You're walking away from millions. I smiled. No, I'm walking toward peace. There's a difference. On my way out, I paused by the wall of portraits. The founders, the leaders, the faces of the so-called visionaries. For years, it had been a gallery of men. But near the end of the line, there was a new frame. Mine. A photograph from the early days, back when I still believed we were unstoppable. My eyes looked younger, brighter, but I didn't envy that woman. She hadn't yet learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to see what's worth keeping. I touched the edge of the frame lightly, then turned away. In that evening, I sat by my apartment window with a glass of wine and opened my laptop. The rain outside was soft, rhythmic, like applause from the universe. I typed 3 words into a new document. Grace Industries LLC. The name made me smile. Not out of ego, but out of clarity. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about designing a future without compromise. A consultancy firm, lean and transparent, focused on ethical tech and sustainable innovation. Everything LionCorp claimed to be but never was. I reached out to 3 former colleagues, engineers, analysts, creators who'd left LionCorp disillusioned but not defeated. By midnight, all 3 had replied the same way. We're in. 2 weeks later, Grace Industries opened its temporary office, a renovated warehouse by the pier, with exposed brick and windows that actually opened. No marble floors, no designer scent, just air that smelled like salt and truth. I hired people who'd been overlooked, silenced, dismissed. The kind of minds who built quietly and burned brightly. Our first prototype wasn't about profit. It was about transparency, a data ethics tool that tracked algorithmic accountability, a system designed to expose manipulation, not enable it. Irony, I thought, was poetic justice in code. One afternoon, as sunlight spilled across my desk, an email appeared from an unknown address. Grace, I saw the announcement about your new company. It suits you. I hope it brings you what LionCorp never could. No apology. No request. Just acknowledgement. And that was enough. I didn't respond. Some conversations deserve their silence. By the end of the quarter, LionCorp's stock had stabilized. But its era was over. Grace Industries was the headline now. The woman who took the empire and built a better one. I read the articles but didn't keep them. Success didn't need witnesses anymore. At night, when the city lights flickered against the water, I thought about all the versions of myself that had lived through the storm. The wife, the strategist, the ghost, the survivor. They'd all built the foundation for this one. The woman who didn't just rebuild, she redesigned. And I poured another glass of wine and whispered to the empty room, let the mansion have its chandeliers. I have sunlight. And success sounds different when you build it for yourself. It doesn't roar. It hums, quietly, steadily, like electricity beneath your fingertips. By the time Grace Industries hit its 6-month mark, that hum had become a current. Clients called us the conscience of tech. Journalists called me the woman who re-engineered revenge. I didn't correct them. Revenge was never the product. Clarity was. The office had grown from 4 desks and a borrowed coffee maker to a glass-walled studio overlooking the bay. The old warehouse smell, sea air and sawdust, lingered, grounding every new idea in reality. We built tools that didn't exploit data but revealed its integrity. We coded in daylight, not secrecy. And every time I signed a new contract, I remembered the signature that once gave my empire away. Not this time. Takikonari. Our newest prototype, Aegis, was a transparency framework, software that allowed users to track exactly how their personal data moved through digital systems. No manipulation, no hidden monetization. Ethics as architecture. When we launched the beta to a closed circle of industry analysts, the response was immediate. One headline read, Grace Lawson reinvents the algorithm she once lost. Another said, the empire she took back is now protecting the people it once exploited. Every article carried the same undertone. Poetic symmetry. I didn't mind. Poetry was the only language that ever made sense of business anyway. One evening in late spring, my assistant, Janelle, knocked on my glass door holding a printed letter. She looked uneasy. Courier delivered this. No sender name, but the envelopes embossed. Embossed. The word alone already reeked of corporate arrogance. Inside was a formal proposal from LionCorp Holdings, now under Mara's leadership. Grace Industries and LionCorp share a historic connection. We propose a strategic partnership, or potential acquisition, aligning our shared vision of ethical innovation. LionCorp is prepared to offer full autonomy, brand independence, and a valuation exceeding $140 million. At the bottom, Mara's signature. But I knew that kind of phrasing. It had Michael's ghost in it, diplomacy dressed as dominance. And that night, I sat in the empty office long after everyone left. The city was glowing outside, its lights scattered like constellations. I ran my fingers along the edges of the proposal, thinking about all the nights I'd lost to someone else's ambition. LionCorp wanted redemption by association. But I'd learned something crucial. Redemption borrowed is just another kind of theft. Still, I couldn't ignore the irony. The company that once erased me was now offering to buy the one that bore my name. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet and opened my notebook, the same one I'd used during the divorce. Every page back then had been filled with evidence and anger. Now it held diagrams, ideas, fragments of future projects. I turned to a blank page and wrote in the center, "What's worth selling?" After a long moment, I wrote the answer beneath it. Nothing built from truth. And 2 days later, I met Mara for lunch at a quiet rooftop restaurant near Pike Place. She looked tired but resolute, a woman holding together a legacy that wanted to fall apart. "I knew you'd say no," she said before I even ordered. "Then why send the offer?" I asked. "Because the board demanded it. They think merging with you will cleanse LionCorp's reputation. And you?" She stirred her iced tea. "I think you already won. I just wish you'd come back and help fix what's left." I studied her face, the faint lines at the corners of her mouth, the exhaustion that came from living inside other people's damage. "Mara," I said, "the best way to fix a broken system isn't to rejoin it. It's to outgrow it." She nodded slowly. "Then promise me something. When you take this global, do it differently. Don't become him." Her voice softened on the last word, and I felt something like compassion. For her, for the machine she was still trying to reform, maybe even for the ghost of Michael himself. "I won't," I said. "That's the point of Grace Industries. We're not a comeback. We're a correction." But by summer, the correction had turned into a movement. Universities invited me to speak about ethical architecture. Venture funds called about partnerships. Tech forums quoted my words about transparency. Still, late at night, I sometimes wondered if peace and power could coexist, or if one always had to feed on the other. I thought about the mansion across the bay, the one that had started it all. Rumor said it had been sold quietly to a foreign investor. New curtains, new owners, same walls. I drove past it once, just once, under a pale July moon. The lights were on. Music floated through the open balcony doors. A party. The house glittered again, pretending it had never witnessed the collapse of the man who built it on lies. I parked across the street for a moment, watching strangers toast to things they didn't understand. Then I smiled, not bitterly, just knowingly, and drove away. The past didn't need burning. It just needed leaving. And the following week, Aegis officially launched. Our servers nearly crashed under demand. Within 24 hours, 10 Fortune 500 companies signed adoption contracts. Within a week, the New York Times called it a technological awakening. When the first major licensing check arrived, Janelle placed it on my desk with both hands, as if it were sacred. "It's more than what he took from you," she said quietly. I smiled. He didn't take anything I couldn't rebuild. I endorsed the check but didn't deposit it right away. Instead, I donated half to a foundation funding women in STEM startups, the kind of women who'd never again be written out of their own stories. And then one evening, as I was locking up, a message pinged on my phone. "Unknown number. You made it, Grace. I mean that. R.F. Ryan Fitzgerald, Claire's husband. The man whose midnight phone call had once mirrored my heartbreak." I stared at the initials for a long time, then typed back, "We both did. Hope you're well." 3 dots blinked for a moment, then disappeared. I smiled. Some ghosts don't haunt. They simply nod in passing. The months passed. The mansion faded from headlines. Lion Corp limped along, quieter, chastened. Grace Industries flourished. I traveled for conferences, mentored startups, spoke to women who'd been silenced by polished men with louder voices. And every time I told my story, the real one, stripped of revenge, burnished with purpose, I saw recognition flicker in their eyes. We all had our own versions of the mansion, but what mattered was what we built after walking out of it. One October night, the city was gold and restless outside my window. The bay reflected the lights like liquid fire. I closed my laptop and whispered the words that had become my mantra. Empires fall. Architects rise. I turned off the lights, letting the room go dark except for the faint glow of the servers still running. Lines of code moving quietly, honestly, across the world. For the first time since that court verdict, I felt what victory truly was. Not the roar of applause, not the sparkle of wealth. It was the stillness that follows when you finally design a life that doesn't depend on anyone else's permission. It started with a letter, not an email, not a text, but an envelope made of thick cream paper, sealed in dark red wax, the kind of correspondence that belonged in another century, when words still had weight and promises came handwritten. The return address was familiar. Albright Estate Management, Bainbridge Island. That was the firm that had brokered the sale of the mansion, the same one Michael had fought to keep, and then quietly lost when the truth about his finances surfaced. The letter inside was brief. Ms. Lawson, the current owner of the Lawson estate, requests a private meeting regarding a potential acquisition and historical consultation. Discretion is appreciated. Please confirm availability. D. Albright. Esq. I read it twice, then folded it back along its precise creases. Historical consultation. That was an elegant euphemism for something else. The mansion was calling again. 3 days later, I stood at the foot of its stone driveway, the same path I'd walked barefoot once, wineglass in hand, believing life had reached its peak. Back then, the house had been a symbol of permanence. Marble, chandeliers, laughter echoing through curated rooms. Now it was quiet, almost reverent, The gates opened at my approach, as if recognizing the ghost returning home. A man in his 60s greeted me on the front steps. Silver hair, measured smile, the kind of quiet power that didn't need introduction. "Ms. Lawson," he said, "thank you for coming. I'm Daniel Albright." "And the new owner?" I asked. He gestured toward the open doorway. "Inside. She preferred to meet privately. I hadn't expected that. And the scent hit me first. Jasmine and sandalwood. Not the synthetic future number 9. We used to diffuse through the halls, but something natural, warmer. The walls had been repainted, soft gray instead of museum white. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, scattering dust motes like gold. In the center of the grand foyer stood a woman about my age, in a linen dress and quiet confidence. Her hair was streaked with silver at the temples. Not age, but defiance. "Grace Lawson," she said, extending her hand. "I've wanted to meet you for a long time." "I'm afraid you have the advantage," I replied. She smiled. "I'm Evelyn Shaw, founder of Shaw Capital. I bought this place last spring." I blinked. Shaw Capital was a name that moved entire markets. Evelyn Shaw was a legend in venture finance. Ruthless, brilliant, precise. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," she continued, "but the house came with your ghost. Every agent, every document, every article, your name was woven through it. I couldn't resist reaching out. Mein Flamme." And we moved into the living room, my former living room, where I'd once hosted board dinners and pretended not to notice the infidelity written in Michael's eyes. Now, the space looked transformed. The grand piano was gone, replaced by an oak bookshelf and an antique map of Seattle. "I didn't buy this house for its history," Evelyn said, pouring tea into porcelain cups. "I bought it because of its story. You built the empire that paid for it. You lost it. And then you built another. That's the kind of narrative money can't buy." I sipped my tea, wary. "And what exactly do you want from my story?" She smiled over the rim of her cup. "Partnership. Investment. Grace Industries is the future of ethical technology. I want in, not to own it, but to amplify it. And I thought it poetic to start where it all began. Well, it was disorienting, standing in the ruins of what once symbolized my downfall, now being offered the capital to build something even larger. The air hummed with symmetry. "Why me?" I asked. "You could fund any startup in the world." Evelyn leaned back, eyes sharp but kind. "Because you don't build for vanity. You build for correction. You understand what happens when power forgets responsibility. That's rare." She paused, letting the silence do its work. "I'm offering you a partnership worth $80 million. No control clauses. You stay CEO, full autonomy. But I want a seat at the table. Not to steer, just to steady." For a long moment, all I could hear was the ticking of the restored grandfather clock in the corner, the same one Michael once bragged had belonged to a French ambassador. Time, I thought, had a cruel sense of humor. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Of course," Evelyn replied. "Just know this. The house may have broken one version of you, but I believe it can witness the birth of another." After she left me to wander, I walked through the mansion alone. My footsteps echoed against marble that had once been polished to perfection by ambition. The dining room still carried faint marks on the wall where we'd hung our wedding portrait. The terrace doors opened to the garden, overgrown now but vibrant. I stood by the fountain where Michael and I had toasted our first acquisition. The water still fell in delicate arcs, constant, indifferent. I remembered the night he said, "We've made it," and how I'd believed him. But standing there now, surrounded by quiet and sunlight, I realized something simple and seismic. We never made it. I did. Later that evening, I drove back to the city in silence, the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror until it was just a shape against the horizon, a relic, not a wound. That night, I called Victoria. "You're not going to believe who bought the house," I said. When I told her, she whistled low. "Evelyn Shaw? She's practically Silicon royalty. If she's offering investment, that's no small thing." "I know," I said, "but part of me wonders if I'm ready to build something that big again." "Grace," she said, her voice steady. "The difference is this time, you know what walls not to build." The next morning, Evelyn's assistant sent a follow-up. "Ms. Lawson, Ms. Shaw would like to host a dinner at the estate this Saturday to discuss partnership terms. Several potential investors will attend. She requests your presence as guest of honor." Guest of honor. In the house I once lost. The irony was cinematic. The symmetry was perfect. I typed my reply slowly. "I'll be there." That Saturday came draped in silver rain. When I arrived, the mansion glowed with soft candlelight, alive again but different, warmer, human. The guests included venture capitalists, engineers, journalists, and half the women in tech who'd once been told their dreams were too ambitious. Evelyn introduced me not as a survivor, but as a builder. Her words floated through the chandeliered air. Some women burned down the old structures. Others draw new blueprints. Grace Lawson did both. Applause, cameras, laughter. And for once, I didn't flinch at the attention. When I spoke, my voice didn't shake. I used to think revenge was closure, I said. Now I know it's just the first draft. Real closure is building something that doesn't need an apology to exist. The room went quiet. Evelyn smiled. To new blueprints, she said, raising her glass. To new blueprints, they echoed. After the guests left, I lingered on the terrace. The rain had stopped. The city shimmered across the water, distant and alive. Evelyn joined me, her expression thoughtful. You'll take the partnership? I nodded. Yes, but not for the money, for the message. What message is that? That women who build empires don't need palaces to prove it. But sometimes reclaiming one makes the statement louder. She laughed softly. Then let's build the kind of empire no man can steal. We clinked glasses, and for the first time, I didn't feel haunted by that house. I felt crowned by it. And later, driving home under the city's glow, I realized the mansion had never been the ending. It was the prologue. The ghost was gone, and I was finally, irrevocably, free. On the dinner that marked the official birth of Grace Industries, Global wasn't held in a boardroom or a ballroom. It was held at the mansion. The same marble floors, the same terrace overlooking Elliott Bay, but this time, the air vibrated with a different kind of power. Gone were the hollow speeches and the men in silver cufflinks who once treated my intellect like a hidden engine behind their empires. Tonight's table was filled with women who had built their own. Evelyn Shaw sat at one end, her glass of Bordeaux catching the candlelight. To her right, the founder of a renewable energy startup from Nairobi. Across from her, a robotics engineer from Seoul. A journalist from London live-streamed segments for an exclusive feature. And at the center of it all, I sat not as a survivor of someone else's ambition, but as its equal adversary. This house feels different, said Priya Anand, the AI ethicist whose papers had reshaped the conversation on automation bias. It should, I said. It's no longer haunted by ego. Laughter rippled down the table. Even Evelyn smiled. I told the staff to remove every trace of its former owner, she said. Apparently, that included the imported wine cellar he bragged about. Good, I replied. That cellar was built on my overtime hours. The room filled with warmth, the kind that came not from heat lamps or chandeliers, but from shared defiance. For the first time in my life, I looked around a table and didn't see competition. I saw a collective rising, each woman a story that had once been dismissed and now had the floor. Yeah, dinner flowed like symphony. Conversations moved from innovation to politics, from philosophy to survival. Evelyn leaned toward me mid-meal, her voice low and conspiratorial. You know what they're calling us online? I arched a brow. I'm afraid to ask. The dinner of new queens. Someone leaked a photo to Fortune. I smiled. Let them call it whatever they want. Queens build, kings collapse. The room applauded without realizing it. But every crown casts a shadow. Halfway through dessert, a bittersweet chocolate torte dusted with edible gold, Evelyn's assistant approached quietly, leaning down to whisper something in her ear. Evelyn's smile didn't falter, but I saw the subtle shift in her eyes. Grace, she said softly, you'll want to hear this. Her assistant handed me a tablet. The screen showed a breaking headline from a tech blog known for its ruthless exposés. LionCorp files suit against Grace Industries. Allegations claim proprietary overlap in Aegis transparency framework. For a moment, the words didn't register. Then the article loaded fully. The plaintiff listed LionCorp Holdings, filed by M. Lawson. Michael. He'd resurfaced. The room dimmed around the edges. The sound of conversation blurred into distant echoes. My name, his name, our history, all tangled in black print under the headline, The Empire Strikes Back. Evelyn reached across the table, her tone steady. He's desperate. You know that. I nodded, but the fury that had once gone dormant began to stir like an old animal waking from hibernation. He's claiming Aegis was derived from LionCorp's original codebase, she said. It wasn't, I replied, my voice sharp. Every line was written from scratch, documented, time-stamped. I know, Evelyn said, but this isn't about truth. It's about headlines. He's trying to stain your victory. And I excused myself and stepped onto the terrace. The rain had started again, a fine mist that blurred the city lights. The same view I'd once stared at through tears now reflected against my phone screen as I scrolled through the article. There it was, my name, my company, my work, dragged back into his gravity. The journalist quoted an unnamed LionCorp source. Aegis was conceived during the Lawson era. Elements of its architecture remain proprietary. Proprietary. That was his word for mine. I breathed in the rain-soaked air, grounding myself. This wasn't 2019 anymore. I wasn't the woman who had to prove she existed in the margins of his success. I was the woman who'd already rewritten the rules. I called Victoria. She answered on the first ring. I saw it, she said. Don't panic. We'll file an injunction by morning. Everything you've documented puts us miles ahead. He wants to drag me through the mud again, I said. He thinks I'll flinch. Then don't, she replied. Let him drown in his own reflection. When I returned to the table, the room had shifted. The guests had heard. Of course they had. But instead of pity, I saw solidarity. Priya raised her glass. To women whose success scares the right people. Evelyn stood, lifting her glass too. And to Grace, who knows that ghosts can't sue the living. The laughter that followed broke the tension like lightning through fog. I smiled. A real one, not the practiced calm I used to wear in boardrooms. If he wants to fight, I said, we'll let him, but we'll fight in daylight this time. Paintinansi got the teamless by the following week. The Times had run a counter-story. Documents confirm Grace Industries' independence from LionCorp. Victoria's team released a 200-page dossier of code audits, timestamps, and affidavits from engineers. LionCorp's case began to unravel within 48 hours. But Michael, ever the showman, didn't back down. He gave interviews, played the victim, claimed he'd been undermined by his ex-wife's vendetta. Each soundbite reeked of performance. Each headline carried his desperation. And I didn't say a word. Silence, I'd learned, can be the loudest weapon of all. But 3 weeks later, the lawsuit was dismissed. The judge called it a baseless attempt to weaponize history. Michael was ordered to cover legal costs. His name trended on social media, not as a visionary, but as a cautionary tale. When I got the news, I was in the mansion study, reviewing a partnership proposal from a European Ethics Council. Evelyn walked in, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Officially over? She asked. Officially, I said. We clinked glasses. To closure? She offered. I smiled. To indifference. Tanti. Mem that night, after the house emptied again, I stood alone in the same room where Michael once toasted his illusions of victory. The reflection in the window showed not the woman who'd lost everything, but the one who had built something incorruptible. I whispered, almost to myself, you took the mansion. I took the empire. And now the mansion works for me. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the sound. Not a storm, just the echo of one long past. I turned off the lights, leaving the room bathed in the glow of the city below. The house, finally, wasn't haunted anymore. It was alive. The invitation arrived embossed in silver, wrapped in an envelope so thin it seemed designed to slice. Global view with Celeste Hart. Exclusive feature. The woman who rebuilt the empire. Every publicist I knew would have called it a career milestone. Every survivor I knew would have called it a trap. Celeste Hart wasn't just a journalist. She was a cultural mirror. Her interviews could resurrect reputations or ruin them with the same smile. And now, she wanted mine. Evelyn forwarded the email to me with a note that read simply, "You're ready." I wasn't sure if that was encouragement or a dare. Sokor. The studio was all glass and angles. Modern, pristine, the kind of space that turned conversations into artifacts. From the green room, I could see my reflection layered over the Seattle skyline, the bay glimmering like liquid steel. A makeup artist adjusted my collar, her hands trembling slightly. "You're trending already," she said. "They're calling this the redemption interview." I smiled faintly. Redemption for who? She didn't answer. When Celeste entered the room, everything shifted. She was elegant in charcoal gray, her hair silver, her eyes sharp with empathy that bordered on forensic. "Grace Lawson," she said, shaking my hand. I've been wanting this conversation since your court case. Congratulations on surviving the noise. Surviving it wasn't the hard part, I said. Not letting it define me was. Her expression flickered. Approval. Maybe curiosity. Let's begin. Nalsane. The cameras hummed to life. The studio lights softened, like sunlight filtered through morning fog. Celeste's tone was warm, but deliberate. Every word placed like a chess piece. You were once called the invisible architect behind LionCorp. Then, you became its ghost. And now you've built something even larger in your own name. What do you call that transformation? Necessary, I said. LionCorp was built on ambition. Grace Industries was built on consequence. Her smile widened slightly. That sounds like revenge with better branding. Laughter rippled from the crew. I didn't laugh. No, I said. Revenge centers the person who hurt you. I center what comes after. She nodded, eyes gleaming. And yet, your ex-husband filed a lawsuit against you just months ago. You didn't respond publicly. Why? I looked directly at the camera. Because you don't debate truth with someone who's allergic to it. Ndee. And the air in the studio tightened, then released in quiet awe. Celeste studied me for a long moment, then leaned in. I have to ask, she said softly. Have you forgiven him? There it was. The question that lived in every shadow of my story. I exhaled slowly, fingers tracing the edge of my water glass. Forgiveness is a luxury, I said. One I stopped budgeting for. She didn't interrupt. I don't hate him, I continued. Hate still gives him rent-free space in my mind. I just evicted him. Forgiveness implies there's a debt to settle. I prefer closure without transactions. Celeste's pen stopped moving. That might be the cleanest definition of healing I've ever heard. Then let's leave it at that. Halfway through the interview, she pivoted. There's a rumor you were offered a seat on LionCorp's board again. Is that true? Yes, I said. And you declined? Of course. You don't rebuild a future on the foundation that cracked. Celeste smiled. You speak like an architect. I am one, I said. I just build people now, not buildings. Yeah, the final question was the one she'd been saving. Grace, you've turned down mergers worth hundreds of millions. You've been called the conscience of technology. What's next for you? I paused, looking beyond the cameras to the faint outline of the bay through the glass. Legacy isn't about what you build, I said slowly. It's about what outlasts you. I want to create systems that protect people who will never know my name. If that's not empire, I don't know what is. Celeste closed her notebook. That's your headline, she said quietly. And after the cameras stopped, the crew applauded. Not the polite kind, but the reverent kind that follows truth spoken plainly. Celeste stood, offering her hand again. You've changed the narrative, Grace. Women don't have to burn down the house to reclaim it anymore. They can just redesign the locks. Thank you, I said. But sometimes the fire helps. She laughed, genuine and rich. Maybe so. Just promise me one thing. What's that? Don't disappear again. We need architects who remember what collapse feels like. And when I stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The street was slick with light. People turned as I passed. Not out of curiosity, but recognition. It wasn't fame. It was familiarity. The woman who'd survived what they feared and come out unshaken. My driver opened the car door, but I paused, looking back at the studio's glowing sign. Global view. The irony wasn't lost on me. The world had finally seen me clearly, not through Michael's lens, not through the court's headlines, but through my own design. I got in the car. My phone buzzed with notifications, messages, articles, invitations. Among them was one unread text from an unknown number. You spoke well today. Proud of you. M. Michael. The audacity made me laugh out loud. I deleted it without hesitation. No response, no reaction. Silence, again. The cleanest revenge. And back at the mansion. Yes, the mansion. Evelyn was waiting by the fire with 2 glasses of wine. I watched, she said. You were magnificent. I sank into the armchair across from her. Did I look calm? You looked untouchable. For a moment, we sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling between us. Then Evelyn leaned forward. So, what's next for Grace Lawson, the architect of consequence? I smiled. We start phase 2. Of what? Of everything. Later that night, after Evelyn left, I wandered through the house, barefoot, glass of wine in hand, just as I had years ago when it all began. The walls no longer whispered of betrayal. They breathed with purpose. I stopped by the piano room, now empty, and placed my palm against the cool marble column. "It's over," I said quietly, not to Michael, not to the past, but to the part of myself that had ever doubted she could rebuild. Outside, the tide shifted against the shore, soft, certain, eternal, and for the first time, I understood what freedom sounded like. Tania. And it happened on an evening so still that even the bay seemed to hold its breath. The interview had aired 2 days earlier, and the world had responded like a wave breaking on glass. My inbox had become an ocean. Investors, universities, global councils, all wanting a piece of what I had finally reclaimed. But that night, I wasn't answering emails. I was walking home along the pier, heels in my hand, the sound of the tide against the wood keeping time with my heartbeat. That's when I heard my name, Grace. I turned, and for a moment the world folded into a memory I didn't expect to see standing in front of me. Ryan Fitzgerald. He looked older, in the best way. The sharpness that once bordered on perfection had softened into something honest. His gray coat was damp from the mist, his hair a little longer than I remembered. "Ryan," I said. "It's been a long time. 3 years," he replied. "But who's counting?" We stood there under the pale light of the pier lamps, 2 ghosts from parallel ruins who had somehow both rebuilt. He gestured toward the cafe by the water, the one that stayed open late for ferry passengers and dreamers who didn't want to go home yet. "Coffee?" he asked. I hesitated, then smiled. "Why not? It's not like my inbox will miss me." Inside, the cafe smelled like cinnamon and rain. The same waitress who used to serve me during those sleepless nights of rebuilding recognized me instantly, but said nothing, just smiled, understanding something wordless. Ryan waited until we were seated before speaking again. "I watched your interview," he said. "Twice." "Twice?" I teased. He shrugged, once to admire the composure, once to listen to the truth. I tilted my head. "And what truth did you hear?" "That forgiveness isn't surrender," he said quietly. "It's just choosing peace over repetition." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The rain tapped gently against the windows, the city glowing faintly across the water. "Do you ever think about that night?" he asked. 2:47 a.m.? I nodded. "Every time I see a missed call after midnight." He smiled ruefully. "I remember sitting in Dubai staring at my phone, realizing how small the world could become in 1 minute. Everything I thought I knew dissolved. And then you sent that message, and it was like someone turned on the lights. It wasn't bravery," I said softly. "It was exhaustion dressed as clarity. Still," he said, "you saved both of us." We sipped our coffee in silence, 2 people bound by a moment that had detonated our lives, and somehow made space for better ones. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and slid an envelope across the table. My name was written on it in his handwriting. Elegant, deliberate. "What is this?" Read it. Inside was a printed proposal, the heading simple, "The Fitzgerald Lawson Foundation for Ethical Innovation." My breath caught. "Ryan," he lifted a hand, "hear me out. You and I have seen what happens when technology outpaces conscience. You've built a company that enforces ethics in code. I want to build the infrastructure that funds it, globally. Scholarships, grants, educational programs. We combine your name with mine, not romantically, but symbolically. A balance of restitution and renewal." I stared at him. "You're serious." "Completely. We can change how innovation begins. Make morality a line item, not an afterthought." And for the first time in years, I was speechless. Not because of the offer, but because of the simplicity of it. He wasn't offering me control or partnership for optics. He was offering alignment. "What's in it for you?" I asked, half testing, half afraid to hope. He smiled, that same gentle curve I remembered from his voice over a midnight phone line years ago. "Peace," he said, "and the chance to finish a story that started in betrayal with something better than revenge." And we left the cafe hours later, the world hushed and clean after the rain. At the edge of the pier, the water mirrored the sky, endless and uncertain. Ryan turned to me. "You don't have to decide now. I just thought, maybe the empire doesn't have to be a fortress anymore. Maybe it can be a bridge." I looked out at the horizon where the lights of a ferry glided across the dark water. "I used to think independence meant isolation," I said. "Now I think it just means choosing who gets to stand beside you." He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant without needing translation. Then softly, "For what it's worth, Grace, I'm not standing behind you this time. I'm standing with you." The next morning, I found the envelope again on my desk, the proposal crisp and quiet beneath the early light. I reread the mission statement Ryan had drafted in his deliberate serif font to ensure that innovation serves humanity, not the other way around. I thought about how far we'd both come, from broken marriages and courtroom silences to something resembling integrity reborn. At the bottom of the page, there was a line I hadn't noticed before. Every empire deserves a heart. For reasons I couldn't fully explain, it made me cry. Not the wrecked kind of crying that once marked endings, but the kind that signals beginnings. And when I told Evelyn about the proposal, she smiled knowingly. "You'll do it," she said. "Maybe," I admitted, "but not because I need another empire. Because you're ready to build something softer," she finished for me. I didn't argue. She was right. The week later, I met Ryan again, this time in the conference room of Grace Industries. The skyline gleamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city alive with motion and memory. We signed the partnership documents in silence. No champagne, no ceremony, just two pens scratching across paper that carried years of history between them. When it was done, Ryan looked at me and said, "We did it." "No," I replied. "We're doing it. This time there's no finish line." He grinned. "You really don't like simple endings, do you?" I laughed. "Endings are just edits in progress." That evening, standing alone in my office, I watched the sun sink into the bay, the same view from my first apartment after the divorce, the same horizon I'd once feared I'd never reach. I thought of Michael, of the mansion, of every courtroom and boardroom where I'd been underestimated. And then I thought of Ryan, of Evelyn, of every woman at that dinner who'd raised her glass to the new queens. Maybe independence had never been about solitude at all. Maybe it was about choosing collaboration without losing yourself. I turned off the lights and whispered into the quiet, "Every empire deserves a heart." And this time, mine was wide open. There's a peculiar silence that settles over your life when everything you fought for finally stops fighting back. It isn't peace, exactly. More like the calm before something new insists on being born. 3 months after signing the foundation agreement with Ryan, my calendar overflowed again. Invitations to conferences, advisory boards, panels about ethics and technology, women in leadership. Grace Lawson, the headline said, is rewriting the language of empire. I didn't believe in empires anymore, but I believed in echoes. And if I could make mine loud enough, maybe they'd reach the next woman before her world collapsed. That's when the invitation arrived, that none of us expected. Salm, the World Innovation Summit, Geneva, Switzerland. Keynote address request, the future of ethical power. Evelyn dropped the letter onto my desk like a detonator. "You realize this means stepping back into the lion's den, right?" I smiled. "Then let's see if they've learned to respect the architect." Ryan leaned against the window frame, arms folded. "It's poetic, really. Lion Corp built its first European headquarters in Geneva. He'll be there. Michael?" He nodded. "He sits on the advisory board now. Token figurehead. The press says he's working on personal rehabilitation. Good for him," I said flatly. "Redemption makes a lovely PR campaign." Ryan studied me. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked out over the Seattle skyline, the empire I'd built from ashes. "No," I admitted, "but I need to." The summit venue was a cathedral of glass and light perched above Lake Geneva, its reflection merging sky and water. Delegates in tailored suits and lanyards buzzed through security gates like bees around a gilded hive. As I walked through the lobby, heads turned, cameras clicked, journalists whispered. The ghost of my former life had somehow evolved into an icon, and I wasn't sure which one unsettled me more. "Ms. Lawson," a young reporter called out, microphone trembling slightly. "Do you have a message for Mr. Lawson, who's also attending today?" I didn't pause. "Tell him I'm not a message. I'm the memo he ignored." The crowd laughed softly, but the truth in my tone left no room for mockery. And backstage, the stage manager adjusted my earpiece and handed me the remote for the presentation slides. My keynote deck was minimalist. White backgrounds, black text, no spectacle. The power would be in the words. As I waited for my cue, I caught sight of Michael across the stage curtain, surrounded by a cluster of executives. His once golden confidence had dulled to something performative. There were new lines around his eyes. The cost of maintaining facades too long. He saw me, and for a heartbeat, time folded. Then I nodded. He didn't. The curtain rose. Manar Huran. Walking onto that stage felt like walking back through every loss that had ever tried to define me. The courtrooms, the betrayals, the sleepless nights spent rebuilding something invisible. The applause was thunderous, but I didn't bow. I began simply, "Power without conscience is architecture without foundation. It looks magnificent until gravity reminds it who's in charge." A ripple of attention swept through the audience. I could feel Michael watching from the front row, but I didn't give him the privilege of eye contact. "For too long," I continued, "we've mistaken dominance for leadership and velocity for progress. But true innovation, ethical innovation, doesn't ask what we can build. It asks whether we should." I advanced the slide. A single word: transparency. Technology has outpaced morality before. It's done it for centuries. But the difference now is that we know better, and knowing carries obligation. Grace Industries exists not to correct the past, but to prevent its repetition. The audience leaned in, spellbound. The silence between my sentences felt sacred. I was once part of a company that mistook ambition for destiny. It built walls so high it couldn't see its own reflection, so I tore them down and built windows instead. When I finished, the room rose, a standing ovation, cameras flashing like constellations, and just beyond the glare, Michael stood too, slowly, reluctantly, but he stood. Afterward, in the private reception hall, diplomats and investors swarmed me with congratulations. I smiled politely, thanked them, but my focus drifted toward the far end of the room. He was waiting by the terrace doors, a glass of water in hand, as if to signal restraint or surrender. When I finally approached, he set the glass down carefully. "Grace," he said, voice lower than I remembered. "Michael, you were extraordinary up there." "I always was," I said. "You just needed a global stage to notice." A faint smile touched his lips. "Fair." He studied me, not with nostalgia, but with something quieter. "Recognition, maybe. You built something remarkable. So did we," I said. "Once." He nodded slowly. "I wasn't kind to it." "No," I said. "You weren't kind to me." For a moment, the air between us softened. There was no bitterness left to wring from it, only the echo of what once was. "I've spent a long time trying to fix my reputation," he said. "But I realized too late it was never about public perception. It was about the people I broke on the way up." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to forgive, only history to acknowledge. Finally, I said, "You know what the irony is. The mansion you fought for, the one you thought proved you'd won, it's the headquarters of my foundation now." He chuckled softly. "Of course it is." We stood there in silence, the lake glimmering like mercury beyond the glass. He said, "I'm glad it's you. If it had to be anyone, I'm glad it's you." I looked at him, not the man who'd betrayed me, but the one learning how to be human again. "Goodbye, Michael." He nodded. "Goodbye, Grace." And just like that, the story that began with an ultimatum at 2:47 a.m. finally ended in quiet civility. To that night, as the plane lifted from Geneva, I looked down at the lake reflecting the city lights. Small, distant, perfect. Ryan slept in the seat beside me, his hand loosely resting near mine on the armrest. Evelyn's words echoed in my mind. "You can't rebuild peace on the same foundation that cracked." She'd been right. I hadn't rebuilt it there. I'd built it here, in motion, in partnership, in purpose. Back in Seattle, when we landed, I walked into my office to find a bouquet waiting on my desk. White tulips, my favorite, and a note in Ryan's handwriting. For the woman who reminded the world that integrity is the only real innovation. For once, I didn't analyze it. I just let the words exist. I opened the blinds, sunlight flooding the room, reflecting against the glass walls of the city that had both broken and rebuilt me. In the distance, I could almost see the mansion across the bay, the ghost of a chapter now fully closed. I whispered to no one in particular. "I took back the empire. Now I'll give it away." And with that, I sat at my desk, ready to design the next blueprint. There's a moment after every storm when the air feels almost too clean, like the world has been scrubbed of noise and left waiting for what comes next. That's what the following months felt like. Not silence, not rest, just the long exhale after years of holding my breath. The foundation had grown faster than any of us predicted. In under a year, it funded 27 ethics labs across 5 continents. Universities began calling our programs the Lawson Standard. Investors shifted policies to align with our certification. We were rewriting the rulebook for power, and, for once, no one was trying to stop us. Still, something in me stayed restless. Maybe peace is the hardest thing to learn after survival. Nainikin. The mansion, our headquarters, had transformed beyond recognition. Gone were the marble columns and gold accents Michael had adored. In their place stood clean lines, warm wood, open light. Every room had a window. Every office had a door that locked from the inside, but rarely needed to be. It was both strange and poetic, walking through those halls. The same floors that once echoed with arguments now carried the footsteps of young engineers laughing about code. The piano room, once his trophy stage, had become our creative commons, a space filled with sketches, screens, and soft jazz that never seemed to end. At the center of it all hung a single framed quote I'd written the night after Geneva. Empires fall, legacies evolve. Bossanosa. The one Friday evening, as twilight bled over the sound, I hosted our first annual board dinner. The team, the partners, the students, all gathered under the soft chandeliers, laughing over wine and stories of impossible deadlines. Evelyn raised her glass first. To Grace, she said, for proving that revenge is temporary, but transformation is permanent. The room clinked in unison. I tried to deflect, to redirect the praise to the foundation itself, but Ryan's eyes stopped me. Take it, he whispered. You earned this one. So I did. To all of you, I said, for turning one woman's collapse into a map others can follow. May none of us ever build walls so high we forget the view from the ground. Applause, laughter, warmth. It felt like music. Yanidam, but later, after the dinner, I slipped outside to the terrace overlooking the bay. The city shimmered below, reflected in the black glass of the water. Ryan joined me quietly, 2 mugs of coffee in his hands instead of champagne. You know, he said, handing me one. When I first met you, you were all edges and armor. Now what? Now you're sunlight with teeth. I laughed. That sounds dangerous. It's supposed to. We stood there for a long while, watching the ferries move like slow sparks across the water. I got an email today, he said after a pause. From Michael. I turned slightly. You're still in contact? He reached out through the foundation portal. Wants to make a personal donation. Anonymous. The irony didn't sting. It almost made me smile. Good, I said. Maybe he's finally learned how to contribute without control. Ryan nodded. You don't want to know how much? No. Let him keep one secret. I've already collected all the others. He grinned at that, and for a moment I thought of what we'd both survived. The parallel betrayals, the shared ruin, the slow rebuilding. Not as lovers, as architects of something cleaner. And a week later, I visited our newest campus in Vancouver, a repurposed shipyard converted into a tech incubator. The students had painted a mural across one of the old steel walls, a phoenix woven into circuits, rising from ash and fiber optics. Underneath it, a quote, "She didn't rebuild the fire. She taught it manners." They told me they'd written it after watching my interview with Celeste Hart. I stood there for a long time, surrounded by young faces who'd only known me as the woman who came after the scandal, not the one who bled through it. It was humbling and healing. I stood through, and that night, back in Seattle, I couldn't sleep. The mansion was quiet, the city beyond the windows murmuring with distant rain. I walked barefoot through the halls, past rooms that used to hurt to enter. In the old study, his study once, mine now, I found the last box I hadn't opened since the divorce. Inside, court documents, photos, fragments of a life dismantled and rebuilt. I almost closed it, but something stopped me. At the bottom lay a small brass key, the one that once opened the piano bench. I carried it to the music room and sat where he used to play for guests, his hands always heavy, performative. The bench creaked under me, familiar and foreign. For the first time I lifted the lid. Inside was a folder, yellowed from years of neglect. Property appraisal, 1125 Westbrook Avenue. Market value, 9.8. Owner, Grace Lawson. Amended. He'd never transferred it back. Legally, the house, the one he fought to keep, had reverted to me through a silent clause his own lawyers overlooked during our settlement. He must have known. He just never said a word. I smiled, closed the lid, and placed the key on top. Some victories don't need witnesses. The foundation's first anniversary arrived quietly. No grand events, no press releases. Just work. The kind of work that doesn't trend but changes everything slowly. One evening, as I prepared my closing report, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass wall of my office. I barely recognized her. The woman who once stared at a text message at 2:47 a.m., shaking, unraveling, becoming something else. Now she was calm, certain, whole. I whispered to the reflection, "You made it," and somewhere, deep in the hum of the city, it felt like the universe whispered back, "Finally." Bye. A few months later, I was invited back to Global View with Celeste Hart for a follow-up. She smiled as the cameras rolled. "Grace, the world wants to know. What's next?" I took a breath, feeling the weight and lightness of everything that had come before. "Legacy," I said simply. "Not mine. Theirs." Celeste leaned forward. "You mean the next generation?" "Yes," I said, "because true revenge isn't taking back what was stolen. It's making sure the next woman never has to lose it in the first place." The audience applauded, and this time, I didn't deflect the light. I stood in it, fully. And that night, walking alone along the waterfront where the story once began, I stopped at the edge of the pier. The city stretched out before me, luminous and alive. 2:47 a.m. The time glowed on my phone like a familiar ghost, but now it didn't hurt. It hummed. I smiled to myself, because somewhere in another life, a younger version of me was just now reading that text, breaking open, not realizing that one day she'd stand here, free, unafraid, untouchable. The mansion, the empire, the company, the scars, all part of the same architecture. And peace. Peace was finally the foundation. They say revenge is a single moment of satisfaction. But peace, real peace, is a lifetime of soft mornings where no one controls your silence but you. So if you've ever been underestimated, betrayed, or erased, remember, your rebuild doesn't have to be loud. It just has to last. And that is how I took back the empire that paid for his mansion and built a kingdom that no one could ever take again.